dinner, then get in here. No, thank you very much for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here, and I didn't raise my hand to report out as Rachel asked, just because I knew I was going to be standing up here. I am going to be talking about just kind of where we are kind of at ZNE and talk about the model, the CEC's model ordinance. But what I shared with my table is that I feel like we're at a pretty exciting time, particularly for local jurisdictions. Having worked with local jurisdictions and kind of in this space for a long time, I remember the heyday of kind of green building ordinances, energy efficiency ordinance in the early 2000s, 2007, a lot of activity happening. And then kind of 2008, a little bit less, 2013, a lot less, just at a point in time when we were starting to think this longer term. And now, even with 2016 underway, there's this appetite and interest in conversation. So that's pretty exciting. So, oh yeah, oh sorry. Oh shoot, sorry. That's annoying. Sorry about that. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of perspective where we are. I should not have sent a PDF. Sorry. Sorry. I know. That's all right. I can, if I scroll, I'm okay as long as I don't try to. So I put this up there again just to give a little bit more context to where we are. So it was in 2008, right? The CPUC did the strategic energy efficiency strategic plan, and that was the first time we did not just short-term, but long-term planning to figure out what are we going to do and how are we going to start looking at these pretty ambitious, or we started setting ambitious state goals. And so that was where we got our 2020 ZNE goals defined at that point in time for residential as well as commercial. There was other kind of bold initiatives in there in terms of making sure low income were served by a certain time. But what I wanted to point out in kind of the context of what I was just talking about in terms of timeline, if you look over at that stair step on the left, so 2008, we said, okay, here's our goal for 2020, 2030 ZNE for residential and commercial. That was already after the 2008 standards were adopted. So then we had 2013, 2016, and then by 2019, we had to have that standard in place. So 3 code cycles for that. That is not a particularly long period of time for us to be going through that. For our commercial, we had 7 code cycles. So that was a little bit more. This was also coming at a time, does anybody remember when Cal Green was first adopted? When? Do you remember what year that came into effect? 2010, January 1, 2010. So here we are, 2008 code, or energy code, Cal Green coming into effect January 1, 2010, because that's when they both became effective. And we're also kind of wrestling with these long-term strategic planning goals that we have to figure out what is that standard to hit our 2019 code cycle. So a lot was happening, and the approach to ZNE at this time was kind of energy efficiency and then some PV, and there we are, right? That was kind of our perspective. And so if we think about that time, zero net energy was super simple, right? We're using as much energy, we're generating as much energy as we're going to use on an annual basis. So it was site energy, it was super simple. It was doing it over the course of that year. And then things started to evolve a little bit as we started to think about more, because we're thinking about energy efficiency and we got some solar thermal, solar electric, and we're good. In 2016, that shifted. We're starting to look at something called the Energy Design Rating Index, the EDR, and we said, okay, well, now we're going to look at zero net energy means an EDR of 0. So you're taking still all your energy efficiency, using this time-dependent valuation metric, and then doing PV to that to get to 0. What did we find out? That was not the best approach, is what we found out in the short term. So if we kind of look at this, this is our energy design rating scale. Here's our 0 home. 100 is your code home. It's tied to the 2006 IECC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code. So that's what the rest of the country uses. And about a 2016 home is somewhere in the vicinity, 50, 60, 65, somewhere in there. What we found out, we started doing some evaluation of like, okay, well, if we're looking at EDR of 0 is zero net energy, how cost effective is that? What does that mean? Well, when you're doing it this way, you're offsetting not just your electricity, but also your gas. So we realized what was happening is we were supporting oversizing of PV significantly because you're offsetting, right, my natural gas consumption with lots of PV to kind of equal things out over the year. This is not working out really well. How many times have you guys seen this image? Like every presentation you ever go to now? But I still had to. Only because as we look at this, I'm just going to kind of make sure I'm not missing anything. As we did that cost effectiveness and kind of looked at ZNE and EDR of 0 and looking at our TDV metric, just realizing that zero net energy is a little bit more nuanced and we have to think about it a little more critically. We've got large scale deployment of PV. We've got PV on a lot of residential or individual buildings. We have an RPS standard, renewable portfolio standard, so that's going to result 50% of our energy to be coming from renewable, which means then the value of our PV from a consumer standpoint in the middle of the day starts tanking, right, significantly. The value of the energy is less because we have more of it. What's also happening in this scenario is, again, that duck curve, particularly exacerbated in the shoulder season. As a New Englander, I think it's kind of funny that we have shoulder seasons in California, but we do. And so in those shoulder seasons where we don't have a lot of cooling, that's going to use more of that daytime production. This is really exacerbated. And so our peak is shifting, farther into the evening where we don't have that renewable production. Right? So we're getting this exacerbated. And so the kind of words that are being used now, so I'm kind of reinforcing them as well, is kind of grid harmonization. So as we were kind of thinking about ZNE before, we just had this idea that the grid was storage. And the grid is not storage. You're not going to be storing that in the grid. I can't overproduce and miraculously, at the end of the year, everything kind of balances out. And so we're kind of realizing this and figuring out, okay, how do we do this? How do we kind of get our renewables, have our 50% renewable portfolio standard, and then we have the bill, right, in the legislature right now to go to 100% by 2045, kind of push it up 5 years. So how do we get there? So again, another one, right? We're flattening out that belly of the duck, right? It's not so fat there that it's still streamlined, it can fly. And this is what I think is a really exciting time, at least for me in this industry, is that to do this, and we've always wanted to do this, but to do it, it means an integrated approach, which is super exciting because a lot of times we have energy efficiency. And here's my solar thermal, which is renewable. Here's my PV. Here's transportation. And maybe somebody's talking about storage. And it's been really compartmentalized. And so the conversation, and hopefully you'll hear some about it today, and definitely hearing about it at a number of other venues, is this more integrated approach where we're looking at energy efficiency, right, because that makes sense, just reduce that load. Thinking about peak renewables and matching that, kind of our sink and I would say sink and storage, but that's not what I want. Production and kind of demand, kind of aligning those at load shifting, and looking at storage and looking at demand response. So kind of all of these to make sure that even though we have this decrease in value of PV during the middle of the day because we overproduction of it, that we can kind of maximize that based on different demand response or storage issues and be able to offset kind of the peak later on. We are also talking about EVs. So again, I've worked in this industry for a long time, and it's this last year and a quarter maybe, you know, talking with the Energy Commission about photovoltaics. Renewable is not under their kind of umbrella, right? They are charged with energy efficiency. We are talking about EVs. So all of this kind of, this more siloed approach has been broken down, and this conversation is happening. So the idea here, this is really grid harmonization, right? We're kind of balancing all of those things, EE, peak renewable production, storage. You can think about coupling EV in there. And that's essentially to maximize the benefit of the generation and also minimize that export to the grid that has negative value or low impacts. So what does that mean? So as we think about the 2016 or 2019 standards, right, we defined net zero energy, and we had the EDR for 2016, and it wasn't working, right? We did that analysis. So for 2019, we said, well, we better revise this. And we, and this is general we, I'm not doing this, to make sure we're sending the right signals, to make sure that folks can engage in this in a flexible way, that they can be innovative, but yet we're setting a bar. And so for the 2019 standard, we are looking at 100% of the electricity use, right? So we're not trying to offset our gas use now, we're just looking at the electricity use. Our baseline is a mixed fuel home. What's going to be coming out of our compliance software is looking at your EDR just for energy efficiency, but then also for renewables. We may get to see storage in there too, which would be pretty cool. You know, things are in the works right now. And we're not trying to get to 0, we're trying to get to about 20. So, and the main goal for this was to make sure that we are encouraging kind of folks to go this way of energy efficiency and renewables kind of coupled together, but not promote oversizing of our PV systems. So we end up with, you know, really uneconomic pushback to the grid. So if that was our goal, right, and we're looking at 2019 to be setting the stage for that 2020 net zero energy goal for residential, CEC started digging in, and so that, you know, we have about 10% of the new homes installing PV. Okay. Well, and that light is like, we need to kind of prime this pump a little bit more and kind of try to stimulate things and get things moving a bit more. So through conversations with a number of different folks, kind of born the idea of developing a local model ordinance that was for mandatory solar. And again, I don't know, I mean, just to appreciate the fact that, you know, the CEC is coming to the table and talking about PV, you know, and electrification and offsetting electrical use, which, again, under their umbrella is really energy efficiency. They would take on solar thermal and they would take on energy efficiency, but not the renewables. So it's a really interesting time. So in order to kind of ramp that up and kind of put something out into the market, they have a draft ordinance out right now. It's on their website. I've got the link farther down there. But it's a mandatory solar ordinance. You have to meet your minimum energy budget without using any renewables. So you can't use your PV credit. You have to do it based on efficiency of appliances in the building. And so once you hit that minimum allowable or that maximum allowable energy budget, you're done, right? You don't have to go beyond that. The way they did the math and the cost effectiveness was to ensure, again, that was appropriately sized PV. So these numbers are based on a little different algorithm in terms of looking at annual TDV energy, again, time-dependent valuation. But what it equates to is about 80% offset of your electrical use. It's kind of that equivalent. And they've looked at it in a couple of different ways. One is, here's this prescriptive approach. So if I've got a home that's 4,500 square feet or less, I can look at that and say, oh, let's see my home. My home falls in that 1,500 range to 1999, so I need a 2.3 kilowatt system. There's my prescriptive approach. One of the things about doing this was to understand or to support ease of implementation. The other side of it was flexibility. And we all know that people like to have some flexibility in what they can do. And so there's a performance aspect too. And I was, talking about the software. And so in CBEC Res, you energy efficiency and your renewables. So you can do a performance-based approach as well. You don't just have to use the table. And if you're over 4,500 square feet, you have to use the performance-based approach. So I'll go through this pretty quickly. It's cost-effective in all climate zones. And you can see kind of the range of PV systems, 2.2 to 4.6 seems pretty reasonable, right? We're not like crazy size. Payback period, 12 to 17 years. And there's your carbon reductions anywhere from 25 to 64%. They did the cost effectiveness. You can see the triangles have it without the new solar home partnership. That's what NSHP is. And with it is the crosses. So obviously without it, it's slightly less cost effective, but well above the cost effectiveness threshold. From a multifamily side, this is done by a per unit basis. This is based on the 8-unit kind of prototype in the software. It's 1.3 to 2 kilowatts per dwelling unit, right? So this is per dwelling unit. This is low-rise multifamily. It's, you can see it's not as cost-effective as single-family, but we're still there, right? And similar payback, 12 to 17 years. What's on the website right now is the draft CEC ordinance template, as well as a cost-effectiveness study. And so you can download those from the CEC's website, and you can be utilizing those in your submission for a REACH code. I'm going to go through a couple more things before I wrap up. And I don't think we're going to do any questions because I think we have questions later. So I just wanted to share a couple of additional options just because you're going to hear from Rachel and Rachel, right? Is Rachel doing San Mateo too? Oh, Kathy, sorry. They're coming from the jurisdiction standpoint. They can tell you that perspective. I can tell you kind of what I hear, and what I hear is we need something easy, we need something clear, and we want some flexibility. Because while there's some standards out there, every jurisdiction is a little bit different. So just to quickly share a couple of things, and keeping track of my time. Another option is kind of looking at more of the classic kind of compliance margin, which means kind of percentage better than the budget that the energy code will allow you to do. And so this has another cost effectiveness study, kind of very similar to the solar ordinance. Solar ordinance is mandating particular PV size. This is mandating a compliance margin, so you have the flexibility of doing energy efficiency and PV. It doesn't mandate PV, but pretty much you're going to get at probably about 5% compliance. 5% homes will be about 5% more efficient than the code, and then they'll kind of hit the rest with PV. So it's a little bit of that balance. This is just some information on the cost effectiveness and that incremental cost above standard building, which is also something that is the #1 question. How much more is it going to be? And our payback period there is like 6 to 1.5 years, something like that. And a little bit higher savings from the GHGs. And that's really tied to the fact that we're doing, there's energy efficiency in this as well, and not just PV offset. The next one is just energy efficiency only. This is probably a little bit more challenging, particularly as our codes get more and more stringent and there's less kind of room just to do energy efficiency. But there's thresholds in here to do 15 to 10% for single family and 10 to 15% for multifamily, just doing energy efficiency only. So again, this does not have PV tied into it. The other thing I wanted to say is that, and I know Rachel DeFranco is going to talk a little bit about one of these or two of these as well, is that coming out of 2013, again, in talking to jurisdictions, they were like, we just, like, that was a really challenging code cycle. We're not sure what we can take on. Staffing is still low. Capacity is low. What can we do? And so, and people feeling that the energy code is getting more and more stringent, and so can we still work in there? What can we do? So we also started doing more prescriptive, we called single measure codes, and this just allows, I think, that flexibility to say, like the non-res outdoor lighting, this is for existing. It can be used for new, but it's also for existing non-residential buildings, where jurisdiction be like, oh, we've got a lot of non-residential, and that's a huge load for us. Oh, and it ties to our climate action plan. Okay, can we adopt that? Or plug in electrical vehicle infrastructure or actual charging stations. So all of these have model ordinances and cost effectiveness studies, as well as documents that take that cost effectiveness study and put it into a little bit more consumable form, because not all of us love to read cost effectiveness studies. So we kind of broken it down to be like, this is what it could look like. Based on that cost effectiveness, this is what an ordinance could look like. And then the other thing we are really trying to address is the existing building stock, substantial remodels. These are some local resources, and my apologies, I might not have the website for the toolkit, but I know that's going to talk about it later. We're going to be posting all of this, the CEC model ordinance, and all the work that we've been doing on localenergycodes.com. You heard about BayREN. The CEC has their website. The Building Standards Commission has a process for adopting ordinances, and NBI has got a lot of support for commercial. So my time is up, but I just wanted to kind of leave it here for a moment before passing it on to jurisdiction so you can hear more specifically of the boots on the ground. Again, I think it's a really exciting time. There's lots of opportunity. We have incredibly aggressive state goals, and there's legislation that is looking at making more aggressive. We have jurisdictions that are stepping up and signing the Paris Agreement. It is a lot of opportunity, a lot of goals out there, and as local governments, you have that opportunity to support them. And they do need support. They need to have activities happening at the local jurisdiction level that shows these wins, that shows these accomplishments, that shows these impacts. And those ordinances support the market transformation. They support code readiness. They start getting us to our goal. And so one of the things I'm excited to see is as we start seeing folks adopt these ordinances, whether it's an energy efficiency reach code or a PV and renewable, or it's disclosure or green building, what that flavor is, that we start seeing that impact, tracking it, and being able to demonstrate it so other folks can go, aha, that's working. It's having that impact. Let me do that. Or somebody say, oh, then I'm going to do more because it's being effective. So I'm excited to hear more about the boots on the ground and where, we can continue to support local jurisdictions.